And because of the rebellion, the world as well is not how it's supposed to be. There's wars, there's famine, there's hatred, there's suffering, there's abuse, there's death. Yet God could not bear for this to go on forever. Frederick Buechner writes this: there would be a strong argument for saying that much of the most powerful preaching of our time is the preaching of the poets, playwrights, and novelists, because it is often they, better than the rest of us, who speak with awful honesty about the absence of God in the world and about the storm of his absence, both without and within, which, because it is unendurable, unlivable, drives us to look to the eye of the storm. There's a reason why Reformed Christians don't run away from art that depicts sin and brokenness. We grow in appreciation through poetry and plays and pop music and motion pictures. We can grow appreciation not of sin and celebrating sin, but of a need for the remedy for sin. And so it's important to ask, not, has the good creation actually become bad because of sin? Right? Is the world itself evil because of the fall? And the Bible answers that question by saying no. The biblical story says no, the world itself is not evil. Evil does not have power to nullify God's steadfast faithfulness to the works of his hands. I mean, picture it this way. Evil kind of attaches itself, right? So you have good creation, and evil kind of is like a parasite that ravishes good creation. I mean, sin can kind of live off of creation, but sin can't replace creation. Good things are abused by sin, but they can't be utterly destroyed. I mean, even the most perverse situations, the goodness of creation remains intact, and it can often shine through. So a bad school is still a school. A broken marriage is still a marriage. Sloppy thinking is still thinking. An unjust government is still government. And so if we take this as a way to think about it, if we have a barn, there's a big difference between a barn and the rats that infest it. If a farmer wants to get rid of the rats, he or she targets the rats in order to get the barn back. And as a farmer does so, so too God aims his redemption at sin in order to get his creation back. These two things are distinct. And so sin, we have to think about it as this kind of alien invader. It's contrary to God's purposes. It doesn't belong. It's incapable of destroying God's handiwork totally. And the biblical story is that creation is not intrinsically evil. What it needs is to be redeemed. Redemption. Again from Romans, but the gift is not like the trespass, for if the many died by the trespass of the one man, how much more did God's grace and the gift that came by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, overflow to the many? Thankfully, the story continues, right? That the loving Creator determined to turn evil and suffering that we have caused into good, that will be to his ultimate glory. And so the next movement of the story shows that God implements his master plan for redeeming the world and for rescuing fallen sinners in a broken world. In the person of Jesus Christ, God himself comes to renew and restore his people and his planet. He sends his one and only Son, Jesus, into this war zone, the war zone of the world, and he offers a truce. He paid for our rebellion on the cross, so that we could be pardoned and forgiven. And then his resurrection makes it possible for a relationship with God again. And so the grand narrative of Scripture climaxes here in the death and resurrection of Jesus. And even back in the Garden of Eden, even when the curse was spoken, God sowed the seeds of redemption. Almost hidden, yet still right there in Genesis 3, verse 15, we find the first reference to the offspring, it was probably reverent as well, to the offspring of the woman, namely Jesus, right? Who will crush Satan's head. A redeemer who will right all wrongs, who will save, restore, heal. And we can get a glimpse through this biblical story where Christ has begun to make all things new, even in the middle of the story. Even now, it's already, but it's not yet complete. And we know that one day all things will be completely restored. And the Bible shows us that history keeps moving progressively towards this goal, towards completion, toward that day when everything will be renewed. And we often can forget as Christians in the midst of our daily life that Scripture points to this restoration, when Christ will return and restore everything to the rightful place. And so even when we see redemption coming, encroaching on our world today, it comes only partially, and we don't get the full picture of it. But one day, we will see it fully and completely. During Reactivate, that youth conference that a number of our youth went to, Casey Brom was painting during the talks. And it's helpful because there's 3 of them, and we'll walk through them. We need to remember, of course, that creation, this is the title of the first one, creation is much broader and more comprehensive than we tend to think. We have to have a big picture of the world that God has created. If we have a small picture of God's creation, we're going to run into problems. Big picture of creation. Secondly, the fall affects that creation to its fullest extent. Every nook and cranny. Sin and evil, the serpent has literally wormed his way into everything. But then finally, redemption. Redemption, new life in Jesus Christ reaches just as far as the fall. The redemption of Jesus Christ reaches just as far and even beyond the fall. And what's distinct, I guess, in some ways, if we want to call this a reformed world and life view, what's distinct about it is both its understanding of just how radical and just how universal is both sin and redemption. They're both just huge. And so this larger kind of story arc, right, is evident in history as a whole. But we also see how you get to little stories in the Bible, right? Individual stories in the Bible, and they help us understand the larger story. So each Bible story often contains kind of a signpost for redemption. They contain in these kind of miniature versions mirrors of creation and fall and redemption and restoration. The signs of what one day will be. So if you're reading the story of Esther or of Moses or of Samson or Rahab or Elijah or David, all these kind of are stories with kind of smaller versions of redemption. But at the same time, those smaller stories point to, of course, the larger redemption, when our Redeemer will come, when he'll bring redemption to the entire world. And, of course, he'll bring redemption to each of our stories as well. Restoration, new creation. Revelation 21, just the chapter before ours. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore. For the former things have passed away. And he who was seated on the throne said, Behold, I am making all things new. So God doesn't leave it there. The story doesn't end with redemption. It's fixed. God has promised to renew the whole world. And the Bible gives us a peek, a glimpse into this glorious future. One day he's going to come back, and he's going to restore all of creation to the way it was meant to be. No more wars or sorrow or mourning or pain. It will be heaven on earth once more. Everything's made new, renewed, made right. And this is what the Bible story points towards. I mean, think the biblical stories that we have. Just think about Jesus' miracles. Now, almost all of Jesus' miracles, maybe with the exception of when Jesus curses the fig tree, but almost all of Jesus' miracles are miracles of restoration. There's restoration of health. There's restoration of life. There's restoration to freedom from demonic oppression. Right? All these things are about restoration. And those biblical stories of restoration, of Jesus' work in the world at one time and one place, remind us that at some point in the future, we'll have full restoration. In a book entitled Heaven, Randy Alcorn explains why this matters so much. He writes, "If God were to end history and reign forever in a distant heaven, earth would be remembered as a graveyard of sin and failure. Instead, earth will be redeemed and recreated." Or as country singer Kenny Chesney twangs, everyone wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to go right now. Right? In some ways, maybe that's because it's hard to imagine what it will be like to live in a perfect world, in perfect union with a perfect God. When he writes about hope, theologian Lewis Smedes writes a book about hope, and he points out that a key element of hope is the ability to imagine a desired future. The ability to imagine a desired future. If we can't picture it, right, then we won't desire it. And our hope won't be very lively. It won't be very real. And so again, it's often the arts that can give us a window into this hope. N.T. Wright points it out this way. He says, "The arts are not the pretty but irrelevant bits around the border of reality. They are highways into the center of a reality which cannot be glimpsed, let alone grasped any other way. The present world is good, but broken and in any case incomplete. Art of all kinds enables us to understand that paradox in its many dimensions. But the present world is also designed for something which has not yet happened. Perhaps art can help us look beyond the immediate beauty with all its puzzles and to glimpse that new creation which makes sense not only of beauty, but of the world as a whole and ourselves within it." And so in Revelation, it paints this glorious picture of the New Jerusalem. And why does it do so? It wants to stir our imaginations, and so therefore also our hope. Well, art can do the same thing. And through all of history, it's really what we've seen is God's great campaign to do just that, to stir our imaginations. And our text tells us that at the end of history, when Jesus finally defeats evil and all the evil that ruined God's good earth, God will restore paradise. There will be a new heaven and a new earth in which God himself comes to dwell with us. N.T. Wright one more time. "And when the cynic reminds us that people fall off crags, get lost after sunset, and are drowned by waves and eaten by lions, when the cynic cautions that faces get old and lined and forms get pudgy and sick, then we Christians do not declare that it was all a mistake. We do not avail ourselves of Plato's safety hatch and say that the real world is not a thing of space, time, and matter, but another world into which we can somehow escape. No, it's different than that. Instead, what we do is we insist that the present world is the real one. And we acknowledge that in some places it's in some pretty bad shape. But we are expecting it to be repaired. And so we tell, in other words, the story of a good creator, longing to put the world back into the good order for which it was completely designed. We tell the story of a God who does, well, at least two things, which some of the time at least we all want and need. Namely, He is a God who completes what he starts. He will bring to completion what he has begun. And second, we insist on a God who comes to the rescue of those who seem lost and enslaved in the way the world is now. And so that's the picture of the creation, fall, redemption, restoration. And as we kind of come to a conclusion to our look at creation care, this retelling of the creation, fall, restoration, redemption, restoration story is kind of augmented, I think, by the way a friend of mine from seminary likes to tell this story. And I think this is helpful for us. If you just change the language a little bit in something that some of us here are quite familiar with, and some of us, this is quite new, but if you tweak the language just a little bit, I think if you engage the language of garden kingdom throughout Scripture, I think you help yourself understand the story just a little bit more. So what if, instead of creation, we use the term planting? We describe the opening movement, the